First of all, you have to understand that you're playing with the racket head. Now, let's go into some deeper details about it. And if you'd have to minimize or shrink your stroke to the absolute minimum, it all comes down to the racket, what the racket does. Everything else basically helps to move the racket, because in the end of the racket right here, let's say this is the farthest point, that is where we hit the ball. That is how we get the most amount of power and control to our shots. So now, if we look at it from this perspective, let's say there is only the racket, and how would we hit a ball to hit it as hard as possible if we do not have a body attached to the racket? That means that we would want to move the furthest point of the racket, which is the top of the racket, from far back to the front, like this, all right? So this is basically the minimum that you can do to hit a forehand. Obviously, we don't hit a forehand like that. Now we're breaking down this whole stroke, this whole beautiful forehand. We're breaking down to the point of what happens when you come to the contact point, because the contact point is somewhere around here. So if we eliminate everything else, the racket head would go from here to here. We want our racket head to move fastest, and we always want the racket head to move further away from our body. So that means that when we start pulling the racket out, the racket head moves last. But when we come to the contact point, that is where our wrist stops and the racket head moves through, the arm follows. This is important to understand here. First, the racket head goes last, but then once we reach the contact point, where we have the maximum amount of strength, that's where the racket head goes first. And this is important to understand, that you do not want to push like this. Let me take a couple balls and show you. So again, we'll get back to the very beginning. A stroke is having your racket head, like the top of the racket, pointing the opposite way of where we're hitting, and then we want to swing the racket head through. Obviously, we don't hit that like that. It's too much strain on the wrist. You can't hit hard like that, but we're just getting the idea. And when people teach tennis, or when people start to play, they start pushing like this. And this forms a wrong habit, because then you take a backswing and then you start hitting and then you keep pushing without letting your racket head actually move through. That is why when you're learning, you have to learn a swing of the racket head and not a push. Don't get me wrong, in order to learn how the ball bounces, to learn the rhythm, to learn tennis in general, yeah, you can push the ball sometimes, and sometimes it happens when a game situation asks for it. It is a good thing to do, but if you want a technique that will allow you to hit the hardest you possibly can and best precision and be efficient with it, these are the biomechanics. So now, if we understand that our racket head has to swing through, then we're trying to use our body to apply that to our racket head, right? If I had to show you the tiny progression, it'd be something like this. From here, racket head goes, the wrist. Now, I take it a little further back and I turn. I take it further back and I go. And every time I do it, my racket head has to go first. We don't want my wrist to push like this. We want the racket head to go. It's the same thing on the serve. If you guys are interested, please leave some comments. I can explain how it works on the serve. But for the forehand, remember that it is a swinging motion and you have to learn to swing your racket head through. Obviously, the direction of the shot, you have to the swing has to be directed where you're hitting. Everything that we were talking about still applies, but this is the main concept. And the only shots that do not have this swinging motion are volleys, because there mainly you lead the wrist, like the bottom, the handle of the racket forward, and not the racket head like this. All right? So in every other shot, it's a swing, volleys, and maybe slices to a certain degree is more of a push. I hope this helps you guys, and if you use it, you're gonna hit much harder because the acceleration, the speed of your racket head always transforms in the speed of the ball. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you guys soon.